So Alison and I have been talking just prior to me pressing the record button here about her upcoming trip to Morocco, because it's going to relate very specifically to the topics which I'm hoping we're going to cover in this conversation. Let's backtrack just slightly then, Alison, and kind of let everybody into our little conversation, which we started and then decided, oh, actually, this should be part of the episode. So let's begin from the beginning. So I said, how are you? What are you up to? And you said,
I'm dealing with the front log because in 2 weeks I'm off to Morocco. So I'm kind of like, getting everything sorted and getting everything ready. And, next week I might even be packing my suitcase to actually go to Morocco. I'm lucky enough. There's a woman who lives locally here who runs a company called Orbis Expeditions. And what she does is she gets together a group of women entrepreneurs, women business owners. And I went with her on an amazing trip to Malawi 4 years ago. And this year she's doing a trip to Morocco. She's doing the Malawi trips as well, but that might be for another conversation. But we're going to go and fly out to Marrakesh, have a couple of days hanging out, shopping in the souk. And then we're going to go up the Atlas Mountains because we're going to be working with a charity called Education for All, because it's actually quite difficult for girls to access secondary education up there because everybody's so spread out all over the place. So they run, in effect, boarding houses, and the girls come and get their education there. And we're all going to be going out and doing some workshops with them, and we're kind of theming it all around kind of empowerment and communication and really, some of them might go on to start their own businesses. Some of them might go on to work for the charity, whatever it is they decide to do. And the idea is to say they've got different options apart from getting married and doing that. But so that's going to be quite fun.
So we're here listening to Alison Theaker, who, as you're going to hear as we go through this conversation, is all about empowering women. And there are many, many threads to Alison's work. I mean, rather than give her like a big, heavy kind of formal introduction here, Alison, do you want to just give us a flavour of, this whole theme of empowering women, which clearly is a real passion of yours, because it touches on everything that it seems that you do. Get to take a few little steps backwards, if you would, and just kind of give us a flavour of kind of how really you ended up in this kind of position.
Yeah, well, I've had one of those, what do they call it? Is it a portfolio career? It's where you kind of just do anything that you fancy, really. I kind of started off working in public relations, and that led me to teaching in higher education in public relations, marketing, entrepreneurship, all those kind of different things. And then in 2009, I started my own coaching and mentoring business and training, and I did a lot of work. There was a lot of work going on in Devon, where I live, about actually they'd realised there was some research that said if you actually help women to start their own businesses in a rural area, it's going to actually improve the economic performance much more, weirdly, than if you help a man, because men are normally economically active. But a lot of women are not economically active in rural areas. So for every investment, every pound you put into having women start their own businesses, you've got more back. So I was then doing mentoring and training for a number of organizations that were delivering programs which was helping women start their own businesses. So that was kind of what I did for a time. And then I was still doing some kind of lecturing work at Plymouth University, and I met a woman there who was great, and she I'll say persuaded. That's probably she kind of basically was on at me to do this PhD. So she said I ought to do a PhD. And I decided to look at that role of mentoring, which I was doing for women entrepreneurs in a rural context. So that's how that came about. It was a bit like following a ball of string, really. You never know where you're going to end up. So I'm doing my PhD part-time. I'm in my 4th year. I am hoping that I'm going to get it finished this year, that I'm kind of in the writing up stage. So that's kind of, I'd like to get it done now. I'm getting to the end of it. So I did a lot of research, and it was interesting doing it during kind of COVID, because everything happens on Zoom, but all my research was kind of really done. But I think I managed to get 2 interviews done before everything closed down, but everything else is on Zoom. so I was doing that, and it was really interesting to see how that affected the context of the women that I was talking to and what they were doing with their businesses. And then alongside that, and we'll kind of get to this later, we'll talk about the research in a minute, but the third element is that I, with a friend of mine, we decided there was a lot of kind of negative coverage of older women, particularly women in the menopause, around on the media. And so we set up we call it courses and resources, women around the menopause, and we were delivering this face-to-face courses to actually say to women, well, there are lots of different options you can have to manage the symptoms, and actually menopause is not the be-all and end-all. There's a lot of life beyond menopause, so don't just concentrate about that, go beyond that. So I was kind of doing a lot of work with her, which is about creativity and, like you say, empowerment, and helping women just get their self-confidence back around menopause. So that's quite a long-winded introduction, but that's kind of how it all kind of fits together, I guess.
Yeah, and there's so many threads to this, but that common kind of sort of thread to the story really is, for me, that kind of comes across very, very clearly, is this thing about empowerment and confidence. Because we know it's, society, not just in the West but everywhere, literally has always been, very, very male dominated. And when you look at kind of, I noticed in the media only this week, Tim Cook at Apple was saying that, it's very, very clear that women are underrepresented in tech, for example, and that's been a very male dominated kind of industry. Whereas you think about some of the, what you might term sort of innate abilities in women versus in men, what that might bring to the tech industry, which is predominantly sort of engineering focused and centric. Whereas actually, if you think of some of the skills that innately women bring to those kinds of sort of industries and discussions, fascinating, the opportunity for kind of really moving the game forward. We really are only still scratching the surface, aren't we?
Yeah, I don't know. There's a great piece of research out there called the Athena Doctrine, which is a couple of guys that did. They did a TED talk on this. You can find them, and you just put in Athena Doctrine. And what they did was they actually looked at, I think, management qualities. So they kind of did this massive research worldwide, where they had, I think the first one, they kind of got a number of, it was thousands of people to look at a number of qualities. And they said to them, which do you think are masculine, which are feminine, which are neutral? And then they took those words, and then they kind of said to another 1,000 group of people, 16,000 group of people, which of these qualities do you want in your leaders? And yes, not surprisingly enough, actually, most of the qualities that people wanted nowadays in their leaders were so-called feminine values rather than masculine. And they also did it alongside it. It's quite interesting. Some of their research is, how happy are you with men in your country? And apparently nobody is, not even the men. But anyway, so that's kind of interesting. And I think it's this whole idea of gendered qualities, to me, I am a bit kind of, I'm a bit on the fence about it, because I know that they talk about so-called, feminine values, masculine values, and I'm thinking they're gendered rather than innate, I would say. I think we name them as, women are good at this, men are good at that. But I think when you look at kind of brain research, the brains are pretty much the same. It's just what we're told as children, what those kind of qualities are, what people think, whatever it is. So it's not necessarily that we can't all be in tech, or we can't all look after the children. It's like it's what you're used to, and it's your kind of learned competence, I think. So yeah.
Yeah. So is it, from your perspective then, it is more of a kind of a social norm in terms of acceptability, because we're seeing kind of men's health, men's well-being, vulnerability. The two big words that I've been really noticing over probably the last sort of 24 months or so in terms of, men's health, is this whole vulnerability thing, is being able to show, empathy, whereas before it was about be strong. I know Sonia, my wife, always talks about, the kind of the biggest male weakness is about this be strong. She talks a lot about that, and it certainly resonates, for me, the whole thing about why do you have to be strong? Women can be strong. Why do men have to be strong? And what
Well,
is strength? I mean, so you listen to Brené Brown, strength is vulnerability. So there's a lot of contradictions and kind of misunderstanding out there, isn't there?
Yeah, and I don't think these stereotypes serve men either. As they say, men are the kind of young men are the highest suicide group because they're not fitting into that stereotype. So yeah, it doesn't serve women or men, and actually, so yeah, this whole question about strength and empathy and all those different things. So, I kind of, it's interesting. It is that thing of looking at it. I mean, my research was interesting in that sense because when you read stuff about entrepreneurship, there is a way of being an entrepreneur. And my thought was, well, why is there such an imbalance? There was a huge, it used to, before the pandemic, interestingly enough, in this country, 19% of small businesses were women-led. During the 2 years of the pandemic, that's gone up to 35%. So you're like, okay, that's interesting. Still not equal, but an interesting thing. So, and the news, it's not all good news in the sense of a lot of women lost their jobs. More women lost their jobs. More women were put on furlough and then lost their jobs during the pandemic than men. More women are doing part-time work. More women, are having to do work and their business and look after the kids and do the homeschooling and all the rest of it. So it's not all good news. But what I was looking at was, so there is a lot of stuff in the textbooks which kind of, they talk about women entrepreneurs. Well, that implies that women are something different than an entrepreneur then. What? So a woman entrepreneur is different than a man entrepreneur. Is that right? Or is it just that we see so many, when you look, when I ask, I did some teaching with secondary school kids and I was like saying, so who do you think is an entrepreneur? Who was the top name? Elon Musk. And I'm kind of going, oh, goodness me, and if you're older, it's always Alan Sugar and Richard Branson. And you're going, it's all, male, pale and stale, as they say. But so for me, it was like looking at, well, are women actually practicing a different form of entrepreneurship than men? That they should be called women entrepreneurs as opposed to men entrepreneurs. So that was one of the questions I had. And no, they're not. They're not doing things any differently, really. They're still, people say, oh, are women more interested in the kind of social impact of their businesses? Are they, it's because you have this whole stuff about, women's businesses are going to be smaller. They're going to be more, vulnerable. They fail more often, although I would dispute that. And when you look at the figures, that's not necessarily so. They go into, areas which are kind of women focused, and you're kind of thinking, well, how much of that is cause and how much of that is effect? So is it that they go into those areas because it's easier for them to do that? Because that's probably what they know about. They're going to go into hairdressing, beauty salons, whatever, they're running a business, but it's in that particular area, but it's somehow downplayed. If you're like Elon Musk and you're completely bonkers, and you decide, you're going to do it, have an electric car, and it's like you talking about tech. Why are women unrepresented there? Is it harder for them to get in? It's harder for them to get accepted. There's still those old-fashioned gendered notions about what people are good at. With if they're male, they're better at this. Women, they're better at that. So yeah, it's just like, it's kind of like, where's the chicken? Where's the egg here? And it's like, it was interesting for me to talk to it because, women are as concerned about profit as men are. Yes, most women I spoke to had another reason for going into their business. And yet you can look at this when you look at the Federation of Small Businesses did some really good research, and they looked at because I think they're the largest kind of they're like the kind of small business equivalent of the CBI. When you look at, the numbers of private businesses in this country, the majority of them, it's something like 80 or 90% are small businesses, are employing less than 249 people. So they're SMEs and they make a huge contribution to the economy. And when you look at that, they did some research and it was like people are going into business for the same reasons, whether they're men or women. They're fed up with their opportunities at work. Maybe they've had a disagreement with their boss, maybe they've been made redundant, they want to make some money for their family, they might be living in an area where it's hard to get kind of work, you know, and it's, you know, or maybe it's they've got an idea and they want to do something with that idea. So I think that is largely the same for men and women. You go into business for the same reason. You want to run something rather than work for somebody else. You know, and if you live in Devon, you probably want to be able to go to the beach in your lunchtime as well, like me, or just any time of day, really. So it's those kind of things. So I kind of came to the conclusion that we shouldn't be using the term, you know, women entrepreneur or lifestyle entrepreneur. What an insult, you know. And actually, why shouldn't you run a business because you want a great lifestyle, you know? And mumpreneur, hate that. So it's like, why use those phrases? Actually, they are all entrepreneurs. And when you look at it and you compare it with what's written about entrepreneurship, they're doing the same things. They're doing the same things. You know, they're focused on the same things. The only thing, and this is different from the literature. The literature has this thing that you're going to have an idea, you're going to scale it up, and then you're going to sell your business. So that every entrepreneur is about, you know, having the idea, scaling up, selling. No. 80% of small businesses, according to the FSB, just want to stay where they were, men or women. They've gone into business for that reason. I mean, there's a guy down here that runs a surf shop. Well, not that he's ever in it. He's always in Bali surfing, but he's kind of set it up so that he's got a good team of people that run the shop for him, that run the business. He comes in, you know, right, he's here for a bit, then he's off there. So people have the same ideas about why they want to run a business, whether they're male or female, really.
So I want to just kind of explore this word entrepreneur then, because I guess what you're describing here, and I have to say, just putting on record, that I am totally behind everything that you've said so far in terms of the this kind of addition of the word women in front of it. It's like, what is that about? Unless you can show me real evidence there's a difference, I'm not buying it. So I'm with you on that one. But is there a question about this definition of an entrepreneur? Because I think it is this word that, you know, you get, I don't know, college leavers coming out and they've listened and watched all the latest kind of entrepreneurs, the Stephen Bartlett's, the Gary V's, all these people who kind of have made literally a brand, a personal brand out of being an entrepreneur. But they would kind of almost be of the textbook, not the text, but the dictionary definition of entrepreneur, this kind of serial business owner, builder, scaler, seller, then start again and create another one and have almost like multiple fingers in multiple pies. So is that a different beast to what we're talking about here, the lifestyle business owner who is kind of very consciously not scaling? Do you see kind of like different types of entrepreneurs here?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in the end, I kind of ended up, you know, when I looked at all the different, you know, definitions that there are, you know, which going back to like the 1700s when they kind of said what they were. And it was like, at the end of the day, as far as I was concerned, it was somebody who kind of set up a business. That's what it was. An entrepreneur was that. They didn't necessarily have to be innovative. They didn't have to be an inventor. And in fact, that's not in the definition of entrepreneurship. There is this feeling that they should be innovative, but they don't have to invent anything. It's not like you have to come up with a new product in order to be an entrepreneur. You can set up a business around anything. So, you know, it's all about having an idea, setting up a business, being independent, doing some kind of activity for profit. Yeah, profit is in there. But the people that you talk about, I would say, if you look at the mass of what I would consider entrepreneurs, I mean, a lot of the women I talked to, they said, oh, I didn't think I was an entrepreneur. And in fact, I don't want to be an entrepreneur because I don't really associate, I don't like that word. I don't want to be one like that. It doesn't look like, you know, the kind of person that you see, you know, good old Alan Sugar, you know, you're fired, whatever it is. I don't want to be that kind of person. And I'm going, well, that's not what I'm looking at. I'm looking at people who are independent, who's starting their own business. And as far as I was concerned, I looked at I was looking at success because I was looking at the role of mentoring. You know, how much is it important to your success? So my definition of success was simply that they had survived for more than 3 years, because when you look at it, 50% of small businesses go to the wall. in 3 years. So for me, if you're in the, the other bracket, that's successful. Now, some of the women that I talked to, they had scaled up. I think two of them were at that level. One was at the level of running a very, very successful business, and she was in the stages of appointing a good management team, managing director and all the rest of it, so that she could take a step back and have even more fun. And I think there was one that I spoke to who was at that stage, and actually I met her afterwards, and she said, oh yeah, we ended up selling the business. But they'd run that business for 17 years before they did that. So it wasn't just a kind of, oh, right, let's do this, let's scale it up, sell it and move on. Some women out there there were many that were running multiple businesses. I think the one that I spoke to was running 4 different businesses, so yeah. And I imagine that you find men doing exactly the same. So, the areas, and I looked at the areas that they were doing it in, I looked at, there was some retail, there was some health, there was a lot of health around here. Property, women are big in property businesses, that kind of thing. I spoke to a couple of farmers, and that's been the classification of a rural business in the past. The farmer is the farmer, and the farmer's wife has the business to kind of make up the cost of what they can't afford, because as one of them said to me, no farm actually is going to survive on its own at the moment, just growing stuff. You have to diversify. So two different farmers I spoke to about that, and yeah, so that was another thing that I kind of found, this whole idea of rural enterprise. What does rural enterprise look like? Because there is an idea that it is farm-based, that it's on a farm, and then you diversify. It's the woman running the tea room or the holiday accommodation. And rural business doesn't look like that either. So I kind of came up with ideas. One, we don't need to talk about women entrepreneurs, and the other thing, really, we probably don't need to talk about rural enterprise either, because it's looking, and particularly since the pandemic, particularly since everything pivoted and went online, a lot of it's looking just the same as you would be running in a town. You might have a bit more interesting things if you've got a product. It might be more difficult to get it to market. There might be other kind of issues in terms of transport and access and things like that. But actually, the kind of businesses I was coming across in a rural context, you could be running them in a town or in a city, just the same. So that's me. Yeah, let's just cast out all these different differentiations.
It's interesting. It feels like the way you describe it feels like the pandemic and all of the lockdown and all of that kind of sudden restriction and kind of a real, I think, societal kind of shake-up is kind of on this side of it, which I think, for a lot of people has been a really positive experience, if they actually take stock and look at it as a giant experiment. So we won't go into any of the details here, but if they kind of just take those step backs and say, okay, actually where you are now versus where you were, I think from the way you're describing it then, if somebody is today thinking about setting out on their own, so they're thinking about, actually this isn't the lifestyle I want, or I'm a woman who's actually I'm not really feeling rewarded enough sort of to stay in this role. Actually, no, the opportunities this side feel, if they're not location specific or location limited, should we say, if they're not gender limited, because you're saying, well, anybody can do anything, we just take the word woman out of it, you can do whatever you want to do. It feels this side then we're actually on a pretty good course going forward, whoever we are.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. And I kind of think that the interesting thing about the pandemic was the way in which we worked was completely changed. I mean, that's what women have been, doing the double shift forever. I mean, I did it myself. I was a single parent. I brought up the kids. I was working in education. I was a principal lecturer, course leader. I still had to run backwards and forwards to the childminder, all of that kind of stuff. But it's like, all those employers, which was like, no, we can't do any job sharing. It's absolutely impossible to do this job as a job share. It's absolutely impossible to do it working from home. Funnily enough, then they had to do it from home. So it all became possible. So, and now we've got that thing of why some workplaces want people back in the office. Why? So they can watch over them, and that kind of paternalism. And I mean, people have been used to, yeah, it's not all good news. It can be isolating. I know for a lot of, I mean, my daughter was kind of, she said it was difficult. She had a job during the pandemic. She worked in tourism, and she lost her job right at the beginning when everybody stopped traveling. And then she went into another organization where essentially for the whole of her job, she never went into the office. They didn't have an office. I mean, that was a startup that she worked for. They didn't have an office. Everything that she did was online. And she said, it's just really difficult because I'm doing everything. And the women that she lived with, they were working from home as well. And she said, we've got 3 of us here trying to work from home. We're all kind of doing this kind of different thing. And part of her social life is meeting people at work. So now she's got back into travel, and she's found a job where I think she goes into the office maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and then she works from home. So she's got that mix, and she cycles to work. So it's like, so all of those things kind of come back. So I think different age groups have found it difficult. It's not always a good news, but the choice and the fact that you now can work from home, and that it's kind of normal and expected. I mean, my husband's got a job where I think he goes into the office once a week. So it's just like, so that kind of thing has become blended. And so the same thing if you've got your own business. And I had, there were women that actually were running a particular business. There's one woman, she makes vodka. She makes rum as well now, which is, it's all great. It's really good. Samples are great. So, talking to her, and she said, yeah, it was all about selling it in shops and restaurants and, and all the rest of it. And then suddenly she had to think differently. And so suddenly she invented a whole load of cocktail kits, and she was selling them online. And that was very successful because people were sending espresso martini kits all over the place. And so there we go. So there has been that innovation. There has been a change. And a lot of women had to do that. And a lot of them actually said, well, if I'm doing this business and I'm doing it online, I can go and live in Devon. I've been going there on holiday. Why don't I do that? We saw a lot of people move down here, Devon and Cornwall, different issue kind of going on about house prices. But it's like a lot of people moved out and said, why am I doing this? Why am I working like this? Why am I living like this? So all those questions have kind of have come out of this really, really challenging time. And I don't want to kind of, downplay that. And I think a lot of it was to do with, the leadership that we experienced, or the lack of leadership that we experienced. But some things that people have done to cope with that, to deal with that, I actually think are positive. And a lot of people have decided, I don't want to work for this organization. It kind of pushed them into, I've always wanted to do such and such. I've always wanted to run my own business. I've had this idea about. A lot of women that I talked to in my research had kind of started their business late 30s, 40s, that kind of thing, which is then how that links into menopause, because menopause, average age in this country, 52. Perimenopause is going on for 4 years at least before that. But in your 40s, women are, as well as everything else, women are going through this particular hormonal journey where you become, we talk about it as, as your estrogen goes down, which we call lady forgiveness. Estrogen is the nice hormone, the taking care hormone. And as that kind of goes down, lady forgiveness has left the building, and women just kind of think, I'm not taking this crap anymore. So all of those kind of things happen. A lot of women do start their own businesses, and it kind of was, the pandemic was a bit of like a kind of, right, off you go.
Yeah, some really interesting topics coming through here, aren't there? I mean, we'll come on to the menopause thing in a moment, because I think obviously, in this current transition, which I guess society, particularly
yes, the whole country's going through the change.
The
whole country's going through the change.
Yeah, it is. And I think just this understanding of kind of the importance and the relevance, and actually just getting a basic understanding of kind of what does this actually mean for all of us, men included. I mean, I think this is the really interesting thing that's kind of happening with menopause now. Just the awareness of, oh my goodness, it's a thing. It's a really big thing that affects men and women, obviously in very different ways. But I think we'll come on to that in just a moment. I'm interested in this thing about, just going back to something you said a little earlier, which was almost, it's this kind of archetypal role that typically, you said that women need to be looking after, the children, need to be looking after
Yeah.
the house, etc., etc. Those kind of things that, society has reinforced for literally thousands of years for whatever reasons. And, that will be a whole different topic in itself. But we are kind of where we are. But do you feel then that if there is no like an acceptance of this kind of more blended, you described it as blended working, others might call it hybrid working and stuff, where there is this kind of flexibility about the where and the when that you're doing things. So if you want to be an entrepreneur, I'll put in brackets women at the start of that, so women entrepreneur, and you are now it's more acceptable to be doing it on your terms, kind of when you do it, how you do it, where you do it, that actually is going to help to fuel this kind of resurgence, if you like, of women coming into decision-making roles, more senior roles in a larger organization, into industries that they've been completely underrepresented. But also from an entrepreneurial side of things, it's more acceptable to get funding because you're a woman in brackets entrepreneur, and all of these things, because now it is actually how all of us, men and women, are starting to work. Flexible hybrid working, which was predominantly women, probably because of the nature of the other roles they had, whereas now men can take that on as well, but it's not almost a taboo thing. It's almost because it's accepted. Does this give women an opportunity to say, well, one, yes, we were right all along. Yes, look at us in all our dual, treble, quadruple roles that we have to perform. It's like, now come on, guys, you've got to kind of join us in the world that we're in, rather than the other way around. So it's not women having to become like men in men's work. It's much more about actually the men joining the women in this kind of hybrid working, because it feels like it would be a much more kind of usual, typical thing for a woman to have to do that juggling and have to have that flexibility, whereas men have predominantly been, you do the 9 to 5, you do the commute. Is it for men now to come and join women on that side, rather than what we're told in the media is all about where women joining men's kind of industries and men's work? Surely it's the other way around from what you're saying.
I think it's like, in terms of like, there's a difference between an industry, like, oh, should we have more women representing in various areas? Yes, we should, because it's always, it's always a benefit to have multiple points of view. And I kind of think, men and women, whatever, I think it's really interesting. I think, until we get out of this whole, it's just different people, just kind of making those kind of different decisions. So yeah, that's good. And I kind of say, and the Athena doctrine guys, they kind of say, well, men, you need to become more like women, because this is where 21st century leadership is going, because that's where people want it to go, because people have more expectations of the leadership and the managers that they're working for. It's not the old stuff, back in the 1950s, the kind of, need to know business, the autocratic style. We've got lots of forms of leadership now. Leadership theory is kind of all over the place. And they talk about servant leaders, they talk about authentic leaders, we talk about charisma more, all of those kind of different things. So it's not just about making people do things, in that sense. So, and I kind of think that, I think it's kind of easy. It's interesting when you look at it, because it's still not there yet. I mean, I was, I remember, I was at university in the 70s, and it was like, we kind of thought we had it sussed. We thought, the feminism, right, sorted, and then you got the Equal Pay Act. Great. How well did that work? There is still a huge gap. I mean, we've kind of seen that research in PR, where they're still looking at a pay gap. My master's, I looked at the glass ceiling in public relations, and I remember talking to lovely old John Lavelle, who was the CEO of the IPR at the time, and I'm doing this work looking at the difference between men and women's salaries, and he was like, oh, you can't possibly compare that. It would be like comparing apples and pears. And I'm like, why? But anyway, so it's like, that whole thing of, people, no, women now, in PR, they do different things from the men, and it is like, it's a very feminized industry, 65% of the industry is women, but where are they? they're all in those technician roles and they're all lower down the tree. It is starting to change now. I think the last piece of research I looked at, the kind of state of the industry, they were looking at quite far up now. You've got quite a lot of equality in the terms of the seniority. It used to be that, you know, the women did all the grunt work and the guys were on the board, you know, all that kind of stuff. But now I think that has changed. But, you know, I was looking at that in 95 and we're now in 2022. It's still taking a long time to get that. When you look at, you know, MPs, you know, the way that our government is run is ludicrous for anybody, you know, not just women. And the selection process is completely, you know, skewed, and all those kind of different things. So you're kind of thinking, well, if it's not at the top, then what, you know, what incentive does an organization that's run by guys and is quite happy, thank you very much, you know? Yeah, I remember we Andy Green and I, we wrote the first equality statement in the institute, in the IPR as it was then, when we were running the Yorkshire branch, and we brought it to the table. We brought it to the national meeting, and we said, we've written this equality and diversity statement. I mean, this is way back in the 90s, and we said we think this should be adopted by the IPR because there was nothing in the code of conduct about it. And I remember just having this meeting and somebody kind of, oh, that's right. And we kind of said, well, we need to get away with this term, you know, we need to do away with the term chairman. You know, I'm not the chairman of Yorkshire. I was the chair. And you get the usual stuff. Oh, you want to be a piece of furniture? Oh yeah, really? Like nobody's thought of that before. And then the guy who was in fact the chair of the meeting said, well, isn't that it's just a term, you know, chairman, it's just a term. It's like, you know, like charwoman, you know, that's, you know, and we're going, did you just hear what you said? Because he was like, well, if you were doing that job, you would be called a charwoman, wouldn't you? It wouldn't be, you know, it wouldn't be a problem, you know, it's just this job is called a chairman. And we're just going, me and Andy just looked at each other and we were just like, can't believe he just said that. So we're, you know, hopefully we're further on from that, but it's all those things. I'm rambling now, Neil. You just set me off on one and I'm just rambling.
But this is what becomes so interesting, because it kind of uncovers these little anecdotes of reality, because, you know, we can sit here and kind of just reinvent the textbook and, as you say, just continually fuel the issue and the problem. But I think what we're kind of identifying here is that there are little moments probably in life and little moments in time and big moments when, you know, the whole of the world gets locked down, where suddenly there is this kind of almost seismic shift between what we had before and actually what we've got now. And I guess it is this kind of realization and kind of opening up of, yeah, the conversation, just the debate, just the fact we're talking about this topic now on this side. Imagine sort of 10 years ago, we would not have been able to, with evidence, like in your research, be able to talk so kind of confidently the fact that we could kind of evidence change. You could see that there's going to be something different coming, or it's already here and it's evolving. To me, it's these kinds of conversations that are so exciting, because it just triggers those little moments where you think it is actually happening. And it's almost like now we've got the permission to talk about this stuff. That's the big, to me, that's the big difference.
I know. And it was interesting for me. I mean, as I say, you wouldn't have thought Yorkshire was kind of in the forefront of, you know, gender equality, would you? But we were, you know, me and Andy, we were kind of doing having the flag. And yeah, I was interested to see when they redid I can't remember, did they go from code of conduct to code of practice anyway? And what they did was they weakened it to say something about, because I think ours was quite a strong statement about, you know, you shouldn't actually discriminate on any of these bases. And I think it now became a kind of awareness of, and be aware of these different kind of things. And I'm just like, but as we've seen, the industry is moving and changing. You know, women are trickling up, thank goodness. Yeah, so glacial shift is where it's at.
And of course, one of these big shifts is this whole thing, and we said we'd talk about the menopause side of things. I mean, again, just the fact that it is now mainstream. You know, Davina comes onto the, you know, sort of TV with, you know, long show, sort of, taking one side of the equation, and there are obviously many sides, and I'm sure we'll hear your side in just a moment. But it's just the fact the conversation is out there. It is happening. It's mainstream media. People are not kind of shying away from it. It isn't just, it's the M word and we're not allowed to talk about that, which, you look 10, 15 years ago, it was almost one of those taboo words that you would never
2
have
years
heard
ago.
or seen. Do you think it's that recent?
I think it's that recent. When Anne and I started doing this work, which must have been just before pandemic, which BC, before COVID. So we were doing this, and I remember meeting a woman at networking, because obviously that's where my target audience was. So I was out there networking, and I met this woman, and she called herself a midlife coach for women. And I went, oh, great. I said, well, I do a lot of work around menopause. And this woman kind of almost physically recoiled from me and kind of went, oh no, I don't call it that, and it was just like, well, you're a midlife coach. That's what's going on for women in their midlife. That's what they're, as well as everything else, it's not just about making a decision. It's like this hormonal chaos is going on. That's going to affect how they make decisions and what decisions they make. And she was like, oh no, I don't talk about that. And I remember that we had a leaflet and we said something about menopause. And I remember handing it out as some network, and this woman said, and I'm looking at her, I'm thinking, yeah, my target market, she was mid-40s, and I'm going to go, yep, you should be here. And she kind of went, oh, no, I don't. Oh, it says menopause on here. I don't do anything about that. And it was like, no, I don't want to admit. And I think there is still a bit of that, we don't want to admit it. Women don't want to admit they could be menopausal, because it still is, even with Davina, God bless her, it is that same thing as you have a personality transplant. You are, the old grumpy woman, and you're going to be crazy, and you're going to be over emotional, you're going to be all of these kind of things. And besides which, as a woman, that means that's the end of your fertility. So as far as nature's concerned, you're now superfluous to requirements. So it has a lot of other things going on there. Women, and the whole thing about aging women, they become invisible. Good old Moira Stewart, who was told, she had a great face for radio. She was supposed to move off TV, and all these very experienced women. And then, as I've said, women get old, but men become a silver fox. And I go, but they probably weren't even a fox to start with. And suddenly they're a silver fox. And you're going, how did that happen? I don't know. So there's a different, concept of an older woman and an older man. So women don't want to go there. And for a lot of women, the menopause is happening. Their kids are grown up. They're leaving home. They've got empty nest. They've got all their roles are changing. All things are different. And then suddenly they have this hormonal chaos and this, this transition going on. And I kind of think, yeah, it is good. It is good that, Mariella Frostrup did it first, Davina McCall. But you see, they're coming at it from the only way is HRT, and to me, it's not the only way. And so we come at it from a kind of information is power. You need to know about all the alternatives. You should be planning for this. You should be thinking about this in your kind of, late 30s, 40s. Just be thinking about, because as far as women are concerned, there are two options. You go through menopause or you die early. So, and at the moment, menopause is looking at the preferred option, really, at this point. So, looking at that, look at the things that look at the kind of things, talk to your sister and your mother, if your mother will tell you anything about it. My mother would never say anything about anything, because it's every woman is different. It's kind of likely to look similar to your female relatives. See what they experienced. 40% of women don't have serious symptoms, and I think 25% of women don't have any symptoms whatsoever. So they might suddenly kind of wake up and think, oh, hold on a minute. All right, I haven't had a period for a year. Oh, I must be postmenopausal. There we go. There was a moment. I'm beyond it. So, 60% of women have symptoms bad enough that they need to take time off work, but most of them don't feel able still to tell their bosses that that's why they're having that time off work. And we only hear about hot flushes and all the rest of it, and nobody really, and there are 35 different symptoms, and HRT is a bit of a catch-all. If it doesn't work for the symptom that you need it to work for, maybe it's not going to work for you, or maybe you could do something else. And the protocol with any medication is you're going to take it at the smallest possible dose for the least amount of time. And the protocol on HRT keeps changing. At one point it was 5 years, and it was 10, and it was 5. It might change. My colleague Anne, she had somebody in her clinic who had gone into early menopause, I think, and then was taking HRT for a whole number of different reasons. Been taking it, quite happy with it. It was fine. It was working. And she had a blackout one day, 10 seconds, it might have been. And then they kind of went, oh, contraindication, you have to come off HRT. So suddenly she's on cold turkey. What do I do now? So having a plan B is always useful. So information is power. Find out all you can and plan. Because if you're kind of balanced hormonally going into menopause, it's much more likely that it's going to be a smooth ride. But yeah, so that's our message. Think about it before your house is on fire, is what I'm saying. Is, if your house is on fire, you're not ringing up the fire brigade saying, I need a new smoke alarm. You're saying, just come here and make it stop, which is, I think, where most people get to with HRT. They just kind of think, just make it stop. So.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because this, if you're correct, which I'm sure you are, which is this whole correlation between, lifestyle, life change, becoming an entrepreneur, you're hitting menopause or perimenopause, or because, again, statistically, that's the kind of time when you're likely to be an entrepreneur because you've got an opportunity here because the kids are gone, etc., etc. It feels like there's almost an inevitability to this, that you're going to be presented with these options. If you have a family, the family is going to grow up and go, and it's within this window. Menopause is going to happen to you to a greater or lesser extent within this time window. You have an opportunity, because of the way the world is moving, to be hybrid working, etc., etc. Here's the time window. So this is all predictable, isn't it? This isn't something that is this great unknown out there. It's like
only 51%
this is all
of the
going to happen, isn't it? As an
option.
option.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of say, 51%, only 51% of the population go through menopause, but it affects 100% of the population in that sense. So you're right. It's foreseeable. It was foreseeable. It's like climate change. It's no surprise. So yeah, and then suddenly it becomes, I mean, I kind of think it's interesting. I mean. HRT was kind of first thought about in the 60s, I think. And gynecologist, he thought estrogen therapy would be good because it would stop women becoming dull and unattractive, and they would be more amenable. They wouldn't get grumpy if you had estrogen therapy and all the rest of it. So that's kind of where it came for originally. And it is like, well, it should only be 4 years. The transition is about 4 years on average. If it's longer, then you should do something about it, and not just HRT. You need to look at what your symptoms are, what you're happy with, what do you want to do about this. And there is this great fear, and nobody kind of looks at what's beyond it, which is this fantastic creative and entrepreneurial. I started my business in my 50s, that entrepreneurial period. Women are creative, they're experienced, they're the wise women, and if businesses actually can't be bothered to take account, it's not rocket science. There are a number of things you can do to make it okay for women who are having difficult symptoms in their menopause, to make it okay, because you're going to lose that experience and that knowledge. And it's been suggested this might be why there are fewer women CEOs, because they get to that point. The business doesn't want to know. You still got to deliver in a particular way. You've still got to look like this. You've still got to turn up at meetings, in your business suit, whatever it is, even if you're feeling like you're 150 degrees, whatever it is. If you don't take notice of that, then those women are going to leave. And it's a loss to the businesses. They need experienced people with them, and so yeah, it's all linked in, and you don't have to start a business in your in menopause and all the rest of it, but it does seem to be. I spoke to a woman who's running a social enterprise course here at Dartington, and she said, yeah, we get a lot of women coming on the course in their 40s, and I'm going, no surprise. Lady Forgiveness left the building. They're just like, you know what, I'm fed up of working for this person. I'm not really getting my right recognition. I got passed over to a promotion. Off.
Yeah. Have you got any resources? I mean, it feels like you've opened this amazing Pandora's box of opportunity, I think, for anybody who is at this stage and or is supporting or has a family member or a friend who is at this stage. It's just this inevitability. It's happening, whether you want it to happen or not, to a greater or lesser extent. So let's just be aware, let's make this thing happen, and let's either support or be in it and start to make some conscious choices. Do you have any good kind of resources or places you can point people to?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I mean, I kind of think that there's a number of things. One is personally, Anne and I, we kind of converted our face-to-face course into a video course. So we've got a website called livelifeforme.org. And if you go on there, there's a couple of courses there. And one, it's, menopause, we call it, from one healthy state to another healthy state, because that's the goal. And it's up on Udemy. It's a course about 5.5 hours long. And you can watch the first 10 minutes for free, so you can see whether you think it's going to be useful. And then, because our engineers, when we were doing the video, they were all guys. And I think there was one where, I said to one of them, "Oh, you've got the short straw this today, have you?" And he went, "No, it's quite interesting." So what we did was we made a course for men, which is explaining what do men really need to know about menopause. You don't need to know all the ins and outs, guys. You just need to know what the process is, what's happening. So we did a shorter video course for men, and that's up there as well. And it's called Menopause, What Men Need to Know. And I think that's useful, because women, a lot of women don't know. They just don't know. And we are, here's all the information that you need. Use the information that you think is useful to you. And so we've got that going. And then for the men, it's like, if you've got colleagues, if you've got family members, like you say, if your parents or your partner is kind of going through this, you just kind of understand what's happening. It is chaotic for women. It's not that they're being difficult. It just is chaotic. And then if you're a business, to be quite honest, the CIPD, Childish Personal Development, they've had stuff up there since 2017. They've got a whole raft of things for businesses which says these are policies, these are, things that you could put into action. So, there's a lot of information out there, and have a look. Our message is, you don't have to suffer. You shouldn't have to suffer menopause. It's one healthy state to another healthy state. Have the information. Information is power.
And celebrate the wisdom. I love the thing about this wisdom thing is, like, there's value at all stages of life, isn't there? And it's so different, from being teen to 20s, 30s, 50s, 80s, 90s, 100s, whatever. There's always something of value in there. And it's just about celebrating, that moment, really. I talk a lot about being present in mindfulness, etc. But this is about not, as you've described it, not just saying, right, that's it. That's the end, because I've gone through menopause. That's it. Yeah. There's no value on the other side. No. It can be amazing.
It's much more fun on the other side, guys. It is. So yeah, and it was. I remember talking to somebody, and weirdly enough, this is some years ago, and she was Ukrainian, and I was talking to her, and she kind of made some remark. She said, "Oh, how old are you?" Because you make some reference to going to university in the 70s, and she said, "But you sound really young on the phone." And I went, told her my age, and she kind of went, "Blimey, in Ukraine, women are basically, when you're over 60, that's it. You're there with your slippers on, and you're just waiting for them to come and take you out in a box. So it's all, life is over." And I went, "No, I've got another 30 years in me, yet." And we have. So I do talk about reclaiming your cronehood, because crone originally came from crown, so it's the queen. So I'm kind of going, absolutely, so I'm reclaiming my cronehood.
Brilliant. And I think that's the perfect exit. There we go. Alison is reclaiming the cronehood. Off she goes.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Alison, this has been really, really fascinating. It's really, really insightful, I think, for a lot of people, just to open that conversation. So, very, very grateful that you have. I'll put the links in the description of this particular episode, so everybody can follow along. And as I say, you might not be directly affected, but you are going to be affected by this topic in some shape or form going forward. So thank you very much for your wisdom, Alison. We'll call it that, shall we?
Great. Thanks, Neil. It's been fun to talk. Thanks.